Let's go through every grammar point in Spanish that you need to know to pass your exams, starting off with subject pronouns. So we've got 6 subject pronouns in total. The first 3 are singular, and the latter 3 are plural. Yo is in the first person, tú is in the second person, and él, ella, usted is in the third person. Nosotros is in the first person, vosotros is in the second person, and ellos or ellas and ustedes is in the third person. So, yo in English translates to I. Tú is you singular, and it's informal. So it's one person and it's the informal you. Then we've got él and ella. This is the third person. This is he or she. And this usted is you singular, but it's formal. So if you want to talk to someone in a formal context, we're going to use usted. And usted uses the he, she ending. So it's just like we're referring to he or she, but we're using the you formal instead. Nosotros and nosotras is we. If it's os, it's masculine, and if it's us, it's feminine. Vosotros is only used in Spain. This is you guys, so it's the you plural, and it's informal. And just like for nosotras, vosotras is just for a feminine group of people. Then lastly, ellos and ellas, this is your they in the third person. Ustedes, just like usted, means you, plural, but it's formal this time. And ustedes uses the they endings, so the ellos and ellas endings. Okay, moving from subject pronouns on into nouns and articles. So we've got 8 different articles in Spanish. The masculine singular definite article is el, and the plural of el, which is the. All of these 4 words are going to mean the. And the plural of el is los. The definite singular feminine article is la, again meaning the, and the plural is las. For example, la mesa, and this would mean the table. If we were to use a masculine noun, for example, el libro, in English, we don't have gendered nouns, so it still means the book, in this case libro, but we have to use el and not la. To make it plural, we can say las mesas. And to make el libro plural, we can say los, so el changed to los, and libros. Okay, moving on to the indefinite articles, which is going to be your a in English. So the singular masculine one is un. To make this plural, it becomes unos. Singular feminine is una, and to make this plural, it becomes unas. So we can have una mesa, a table, etc. Now moving on to our first tense for this video, this is the most basic, the simple present tense. In English, an example of that would be I eat. Let's see how we can conjugate that in Spanish. So we've got our infinitives. So these are verbs that end in AR, ER, or IR. So for example, comer is an ER infinitive. It means to eat and it ends in ER. And the most common type of infinitive in Spanish is AR, but we've got AR, ER, and IR. So to conjugate verbs in Spanish, we just need to learn endings. So for I in AR, it's going to be o. Then for tú, you singular as, so o, as, a, amos, ais with the accent on the A, and then an. For ER, it's similar, o, es, e, emos, ais with the accent on the E and N. And lastly, for IR, we have o, es, e, imos, is, n. So you'll notice between the ER and the IR endings, they're quite similar, just apart from imos and is. So if we go back to the example of I eat, so in Spanish, comer is the infinitive. We remove the ending, and for I, ER, it's going to be o. So como is how we say I eat in Spanish. Let's practice with the verb estudiar, to study. To say we study, it would be estudi, and then we're looking for the ending for we, AR, that's nosotros, is amos. So estudiamos is we study in Spanish in the present tense. So that is for regular verbs. These endings work for regular verbs. However, just like in English, we've got rule breakers, irregular verbs. Here we've got 4 really common irregular verbs in Spanish. Ser, which is to be. Estar also means to be, and we'll see the differences later on. Tener is to have, and hacer is to do or to make. So, ser becomes soy, for I am. Eres, you are. Es, he, she, or it is. Somos, for we are. Sois, for you guys are. And son, for they are. Then estar becomes estoy, I am. Estás, you are, with the accent on the A. Está, he, she, or it is. Estamos, estáis, and están. Tener is to have, so tengo, I have. Tienes, you have. Tiene, he, she, or it has. Tenemos, we have. Tenéis, you guys have. And tienen, they have. And lastly, hacer, hago, I do or I make. Haces, you do or you make. Hace, he, she, or it does or makes. Hacemos, hacéis, with the accent on the E, and hacen, they do or they make. So those are 4 really common irregular verbs in Spanish, but there's loads more that you can look at yourself. So poner, to put. Salir, to go out. Dar, to give. Ir, to go. Loads of irregular verbs. These are just 4 that we're going to focus on for this video. Okay, moving on to 2 other tenses. We've got the preterite and the imperfect. Both of these are past tenses, so used to refer to past actions. The preterite is used for completed actions in the past, some sort of sequence of events in the past, and events in the past that have got a specific start or end date. On the flip side, the imperfect is used for habitual actions in the past, events that are incomplete from the past, and ongoing events in the past. So I like to think of preterite actions, which is this one here, as one and done actions in the past, things that are finished. So for example, I spoke, I ate, we studied. A lot of the verbs that end in ed in English, and just verbs that show something has been done once and it's over. Then for continuous actions, this is the imperfect tense. I like to think of it as used to. So something used to happen, I used to go, we used to play, that is the imperfect tense. So let's, of course, go through the endings. So starting off with the imperfect tense. For AR verbs, yo is aba, tú is abas, él, ella, usted, aba. So it's the same for the I form and the he, she, it form. Then we is abamos. Vosotros, you guys, is abais. And lastly, ellos and ellas is aban. So to practice what that would look like, if I wanted to say they used to listen, using the verb escuchar for listen, that would be, so we write the infinitive, escuchar, we can cross out the AR at the end, and for they, the used to is the imperfect tense here, so for they is the bottom one here, aban, so escuchaban. Then, for ER and IR verbs, you'll notice they are shared here because in quite a few tenses and in the perfect tense, the ER verbs and IR verbs share endings, so they work the same way. So this is going to be ia, ias, ia, again, it's the same for I and he, she, iamos for we, iais for you guys, and ian. One thing to know while we're here, in the they form, a little trick is that all verbs will end in n. So even when we look to the present tense, they end in n for they form. So any verb in whichever tense that is in the they form, is the eos or eas, is going to end in that letter n. So to practice let's pick an IR verb. If I zoom in here and say maybe we used to live, using vivir is going to be vivíamos. So that's the regular verbs covered for the imperfect. Let's look at the irregular ones now. So ser is irregular in the imperfect tense. So era is I was or I used to be. Then eras, era, éramos, the accent on the E, erais, and eran is they were or they used to be. Estar and all the other verbs apart from ser, ver, and ir are regular in the imperfect tense. So most verbs in the imperfect are regular, just these 3 are the only exceptions. So for ver, we have veía, veía, with accent on the I, veías. Then it's the same here for the he, she, veía, veíamos, veíais, and veían. And then lastly, ir, we have iba, ibas, etc. So iba is the same, ibamos, with the accent on the I, ibais, and iban, they like went or they used to go. Okay, moving on to the other past tense, which is the preterite. Just to remind you, this is for completed actions in the past that happened like once. So for regular verbs, AR, we have aste, o, amos, which you will notice is the same in the present tense. This amos is the same as in the present tense. And then we have astes and aron. And lastly, for ER and IR verbs, again, they share the ending. So iste, io. Accents are always really important for verbs. Imos, isteis, and ieron. Just to really quickly practice. So I wrote using the verb escribir is going to be escribí because we're looking at the I form endings in the IR verb there. So escribí, I wrote. And then moving on to the irregulars, there's loads of them. Like the present tense, we're going to focus on these four: ser, estar, tener, hacer. So for ser, I was is fui. Fui. Tú is fuiste. Fue. Fuimos. Fuisteis, and fueron. If you're doing GCSE, the words fue and fui are going to be really common. These are the same conjugations for ir. So fui also means I went as well as I was, etc. Fue means he, she went as well as he, she was. They just happen to be the same conjugations. Slightly confusing, I know. Then for estar, we have estuve, estuviste. Then for he, she, estuvo, estuvimos, and my U's and V's look quite similar here. Estuvisteis, that's a bit clearer. And lastly, estuvieron. This is where they get quite tricky because the words are quite long. So estuvieron. Then for tener, actually, you'll notice if I start writing them. So tener, we've got tuve, tuviste. There's a few similarities between the ones for estar and the ones for tener. So this tuve is at the ending of the estuve. Just a similarity to point out. Tuvo, tuvimos, tuvisteis, and lastly, tuvieron. So yeah, as I said, they're quite similar to the endings of the ones for estar. So that should help you learn them. Okay, lastly for hacer, so to do or to make. So I did or I made, hice, hiciste, hizo, hicimos, hicisteis, and hicieron. Again, that letter N at the end is always going to be the same for the they form. So all verbs and all different tenses in Spanish, if they're ellos or ellas, they're going to end in the letter N. Okay, that's the three tenses covered. We've got the present, the preterite, and the imperfect. Those are like the most basic, most common tenses that you need to know. Let's now switch gears and talk about other parts of grammar. So let's talk about the verbs ser and estar. I showed you these with the irregular verbs. They both mean to be, but they've got different uses. They're different words, even though they both have the same English meaning, which is to be. We're going to use the acronym Dr. Place to tell us sort of which situations we're going to use ser and which situations we're going to use estar. The main thing to know is that ser is for more permanent things and estar is for more temporary things. This isn't the perfect definition of it, but this is how most students learn it and the main differences. However, I'm going to go through the more sort of specific uses for each of these. So, Dr. Place, this first D stands for description. This is for any sort of physical description that you can see with your eyes. So talking about hair color, height, those sorts of like physical attributes. Then O is for occupation, your job. So I am a doctor, I want to be a doctor, those sorts of sentences for occupation. C is for characteristics. This is more like adjectives to describe you. So either things are pretty, things are like you're smart, you're funny, you're kind, those sorts of personal adjectives. Even to describe the appearance of things, so the color, to describe if a house is big, small, pretty, ugly. Then T is for time and date. So this is where maybe the permanency doesn't quite work here, because time and date in English, in like all languages obviously, is not a permanent thing, but we're going to use the verb ser to talk about time and date. So to give you an example, I can say son las tres. It is 3 o'clock. Son las tres. The next O here is for origin, so to say where you are from. So for example, soy de Argentina, I am from Argentina, that sort of thing. Then R here is for relationships, to objects and to people. So I can say she is my mother, es mi madre, or it is my phone, es mi móvil. We're going to use es and not estar in this example here for relationships. Okay, and then to talk about this acronym place for when to use estar. So this P stands for place actually. So where something is in relationship to another thing. So for example, I could say está debajo de, it is below something. Then L is for location, so where something is or where you are. I could say estoy en la biblioteca, I am in the library, and this works in all different tenses. Any sort of location, situation, or sentence, we're going to use the verb estar to describe a location. A is for action, and we're going to see this later on in the video with the present continuous tense. The C here is for condition, so describing what things are like, but sort of temporary conditions. So for example, something is dirty or clean. This wouldn't fall under characteristics, this would be your condition, dirty or clean, something that's more temporary, more likely to change. And then lastly, E is for emotions. When we ask like, how are you, como estás, to talk about emotions, I could say, estamos felices, we are all happy, estamos felices. And moving on to another sort of grammar item, this is por versus para. So both these words in English mean for, but they do have some other uses and some other sort of differences. They are, again, different words. We can't use them interchangeably. One is always going to be correct in a certain sentence than another. So, just to give you some verbal examples, I'm not going to write all of these down. One way in which por means for is, for example, thanks for something. I could say gracias por el regalo, thanks for the gift. Then talking about by, if I say, for example, el libro fue escrito por mi amigo. So the book was written by my friend. And we're going to see this use of by when we talk about the passive voice later on in this video. Then lastly, for through, I could say, quiero viajar por Inglaterra. I want to travel through England. Then looking at para has a slightly sort of fewer uses or use cases. Again, one of which it can mean for is if I say, este regalo es para mi amigo. This gift is for my friend. Then in order to is probably the most common sort of meaning of por for GCSE. In a lot of sentences, you're going to use para to show purpose. And I've got videos on sentences and going through sort of uses of para in this sort of writing context that I'll link in the description. So an example I often give is uso mi móvil. So uso is the present tense. I use uso mi móvil para contactar whatever. You can finish the sentence however you want. But I'm adding extra information to the original sentence using para. So in order to contact. We're going to see para before a lot of infinitives in these sorts of sentences describing or giving information. Okay, I'm moving all over the place, but let's now jump onto the present continuous tense, so saying what is happening, this ing in English. So it's made up of two words. Let's practice with the example, I am studying. So the second word, studying, the infinitive in Spanish is estudiar. So what we do is we get rid of the AR and we add in our ending ando. So we have estudiando. For AR verbs, that is for AR verbs. For ER and IR verbs, we use yendo. For ER and IR verbs. So for example, comer becomes comiendo. Okay? So this is what we call the gerund, the second word, the present participle. For I am, as we spoke about earlier, there are two ways to say I am. We can say soy or estoy, and only one of them is correct. So let's go back to our uses of ser and estar and see which one we're going to use. So for estar, A is for action, and we're going to use, because I am studying is an action, we're going to use estar. So it's going to be estoy estudiando. So therefore, the present continuous tense is made up of the present tense conjugations of estar. So we have estoy, estás, está, estamos, estáis, and están. And the second word is going to be our gerund. So, for example, estudiando, comiendo, etc. Let's practice really quickly with two examples. So, let's say she is using. So the he, she for estar is está with the accent on the a. So está, and then usar is our infinitive. So we're going to say usando. Okay, he or she is studying, and then lastly, let's do they are eating. We've seen comiendo is eating. They are is están. So están comiendo. So that's it. That's how easy the present continuous tense is. There are irregulars, but you can search them up yourself. One example of an irregular is for dormir, which is to sleep. We don't say dormiendo. We say durmiendo with a U. There's almost a stem changing there. That O changes to a Y. So moving on to the future tenses, there are three in total. We've got the normal future, the conditional, and the near future. The near future is probably the easiest one, so let's start there. So the near future is saying what's going to happen. So for example, if I write down a sentence, we are going to travel. Let's see how to form this. So the near future is made up of the present tense of ir, so that becomes voy, vas, va, vamos, vais, and van. Then we have a. This preposition is pretty much just meaning to. And then we have the infinitive. So in this case, voy a plus infinitive, that is the structure for this tense. To say we are going to travel, so we are going, that's going to be covered by vamos. Vamos a, and then viajar is that word travel, is the infinitive form, so it ends in that er. So we are going to travel, three words, vamos a viajar. To practice with another one, I am going to study is voy a estudiar. Okay, easy as that. Let's move to the future tense next. The future and the conditional are quite similar, to be fair, but let's talk about the future tense. So this talks about what will happen. It's made up of two bits. We have the infinitive and then just a set of endings. In most tenses, for example, the present tense, you get rid of the er and you add in the ending. However, in this tense, we keep the infinitive and we add something to the end of that infinitive. So now let's obviously go through the endings. So for I form, it's e, then it goes as, then a, then hemos, eis, and an. So let's work out how to say not I'm going to, I will eat. So comere is I will eat. Okay, so we've got any infinitive here, plus there's endings attached to the end of the infinitive. The future and the conditional tenses are the only tenses that work like this, where we're just attaching endings to the end of the infinitive rather than getting rid of the infinitive entirely. So let's say we will help. Ayudar is your infinitive here. Ayudar, if I show you guys the endings. For we, it's hemos, so ayudaremos. Sort of long there because we've got the extra sort of letters here from the infinitive. Ayudaremos is one big word. Now, there are irregulars for this, but we'll talk about it after we talk about the conditional tense because the irregulars for the future and conditional are the same. Again, both of these tenses work very similarly. So for the conditional, we have the infinitive plus just another set of endings. This time, these endings are the same as the imperfect. So ias, ia, iamos, iais, and ian. So you'll notice these endings are the exact same. They're duplicates of the ones for the imperfect tense that we saw up here. You may be wondering, how can you differentiate between the conditional and the imperfect? The infinitive ending is how you can tell. So, I would eat, I should have mentioned earlier, this is what would happen. Your would So, for example, I would eat is going to be comería. However, in the imperfect tense, comía is I used to eat. The difference here, as you can see in that spelling, is going to be the er there. Yeah, there's no infinitive in the imperfect tense, so it's a bit shorter. So comería, I would eat. They would study. Jugar is your infinitive there, so jugarían. So really basic. Once you've got the endings down, these tenses are not too complicated. You just have to learn how they work with the endings and stuff, how to conjugate the verbs. Okay, so future and conditional done. Let's talk about the irregular bits, which is covered here. It's the same for the future and the conditional. So let's pick, for example, poder, which is to be able to do something. If I wanted to say I would be able to, I cannot say podría. It's too difficult to pronounce. So what Spanish people do and what the sort of language does, what you're meant to do, is change the stem. So we don't have poder, we use podr. We get rid of the letter E there. So now if I do the same here, I would have podría, which is much easier to say than podería. So I would be able to do is podría, and that is correct. Let's talk about the other stems. So poder is done, decir becomes dir. You may have seen diriake, and that's where this comes from. I would say that diriake from dir, from decir. Tener becomes tendre. We're almost just losing some of the vowels. That's sort of what happens here. Hacer becomes ar, har, and poner becomes pondre. So let's say I will put using poner, pondre. I will put pondre. Vale? And that's how the irregular sort of stems work here for the future and conditional tenses. So that covers those three tenses and the irregulars. Okay, moving on to something that isn't tenses, we've got the active and passive voice. These both exist in English, but you probably haven't thought about them in a while. So, an example of an active sentence in English would be the chef prepared the meal. The reason this is an active sentence is because we've got the subject, the verb is doing, then the object. Now to translate this into Spanish, it would be el chef. Prepared is preparar is the infinitive, so preparó in that preterite tense, that sort of he, she ending, preparó la comida. So that's all well and good. We've got the active sentences there. Now to put this into the passive voice, in English it would be the meal was prepared. So that itself is a sentence. The meal was prepared is its own sentence. But to add on the chef bit, we can say, I'll put it in brackets for now, by the chef. So the meal was prepared by the chef. In Spanish, that's going to be la comida. To say was prepared, we're going to use ser. So in the preterite tense, fue preparada por el chef. So that's the sentence in the passive voice. However, it's quite a long way of going about it. There is another type of passive voice, which is la voz pasiva con se. So with this pronoun se. Let's have a look at that really quickly. So to say the same sentence, I could say se preparó la comida. So this has the same meaning as la comida fue preparada. Se preparó la comida. So to form this passive voice con se, we have the se pronoun here, which never changes. Preparó, this third person preterite tense verb, changes depending on la comida. So if we could say se prepararon las comidas. If it was the meals were prepared, se prepararon, that third person, but plural this time, preterite tense, las comidas. With la voz pasiva con se, we never have the agent, so we wouldn't say por el chef in these cases. If we wanted to say by who the action was done, we would use the true passive voice using la comida fue preparada. Okay, and that's the active and passive voice. So, for example, at GCSE and A-Level, you are going to see the use of the passive voice. At A-Level, it's way more common to see the voz pasiva con se, but you should know both passive voices there. Okay, moving on to another sort of grammar bit, which is reflexive verbs. These are verbs that end in se. So, we've got infinitives like lavar, which means to wash. But if you're talking about washing yourself, like having some sort of shower or washing your hands, then we would say lavarse. We would have that se there, and this means to wash like a body part of yours. Other verbs like ducharse, again, ducharse is to shower, but to shower yourself. Casar is another verb, so just as casar, just in that form, it means to marry. But to say to get married, for like yourself to get married, we'd say casarse. So this se ending in these reflexive verbs just makes it makes the subject and the object the same. So for example, if I had the sentence, the boy washed his hands. The reason we have to use lavarse as that reflexive verb is because the boy and hands are the same thing. It's like the boy is washing himself. The object is the same as the subject. Let's talk about how to conjugate these reflexive verbs and put them into sentences. So first thing we need to learn are the reflexive pronouns. These are what we are going to replace this ending se with. So we've got me for the I form, te for the you singular, se for he, she, it, nos for we, os for you guys, for vosotros, and then se lastly for they, for ellos and ellas. So you'll see the one for he, she, and they are the same in the third person, se. So let's put these in action. Let's say I wash, and we're saying I wash myself. So to say that in Spanish, it would be lavo, I wash. But to say myself, we're going to put that pronoun me in front. So me lavo. Then moving on to they shower. And we're almost saying they shower themselves. So I've said shower is ducharse. So we're going to have duchan in that present tense, they, and se duchan to say they shower themselves. So se duchan. Okay, another sentence now. Let's do it in the preterite tense. So they showered. In the past, they showered. So super similarly, we're still going to have that se, so I can put it in there for now. And then ducharon, in that preterite tense, for AR verbs is the ending aron. So they showered, se ducharon. Another sort of example is going to be with the infinitive. So if I wanted to say, I want to get married, quiero is I want, in that preterite tense, from querer, which is the infinitive. So quiero. We're going to say casar me. So we're going to change that se in the infinitive to me. So casarme is still the infinitive. After quiero, we always are going to have the infinitive if you're going to have a verb. So for example, quiero nadar, I want to swim. Quiero casarme, this is correct, this is the infinitive. But instead of saying quiero casarse, we're saying it's like I want to get married, you're focusing on the I bit. So quiero casarme. So we change the ending in se to me, and that's correct how we can use the infinitives as well in this sort of structure with verbs like quiero. And that, in a nutshell, is how reflexive verbs work. These are most commonly going to be used in sort of your morning routine verbs. So to wash my hair, to comb my hair, to get up in the morning, those sorts of verbs, to get dressed. To give you an example of a sentence that has a lot of these reflexive verbs, so describing a morning routine, I could say, por la mañana me despierto. I got up, me despierto, or I get up, it's in the present tense. A las 7 me levanto de la cama, I get out of bed. Me ducho con agua caliente. I shower myself, or I have a shower with warm water. Me visto rápidamente. I get dressed quickly. Y me cepillo los dientes antes de desayunar. I brush my teeth before having breakfast, or before, yeah, antes de desayunar, or before having breakfast. Okay, so that's an example of the sort of daily routine, morning routine kind of sort of sentence with reflexive verbs. Okay, so that's reflexive verbs covered. We've got two more tenses to talk about before we can talk about the subjunctive, which is going to be the last thing we cover in this video. So, two last tenses, the perfect tenses. We've got the present perfect and the past perfect. Looking at the present perfect first. In English, this is saying, for example, I have eaten. Instead of saying I ate or I used to eat, we're now saying have. I have eaten. This compound tense has got two verbs. I have and then eaten. So let's see how to do it in Spanish. It's going to be made up of two words. The first word is going to be the conjugation of haber, and the second one is going to be your past participle. Let's start off by looking at past participles. So if you remember, for the present continuous, we had present participles. So for example, hablando. And this is speaking, is what that means. The past participle is really similar. We get rid of this N, so we have hablado. So for AR verbs, we're going to have this ending ado. So you've got your hablar, get rid of the AR, add in the ending ado. So hablado means spoken. So really similar to the present participle, speaking, this is spoken. An example with the ER verb, so comer, we have comiendo as the present participle, eating. For the past participle, it's comido, eaten, and this word here means eaten. So that's the present participles. Let's look at the conjugations of haber. So haber is a really interesting verb. It means to have. But you may ask yourself, tener also means to have, so what's the difference? Tener is only used for possessions. So for example, I could say tengo un gato, tengo 18 años, whatever. So things that you have, possessions. Haber is used for your compound tenses. So just like in English, when I say I have eaten, it doesn't mean you have an object called eaten. It's you've done the verb, which is the verb to eat. So I have eaten, this is where we're going to use haber to talk about like actions and verbs. For possessions, we're going to use tener. Haber is what is known as an auxiliary verb. So let's look at the conjugations of haber in the present tense. So starting off with I have has, a, hemos, habéis is the you guys one, habéis with the accent on the e, and an. So you can almost see how similar this is to your o, as, a, amos, ais, an. It follows a sort of eerily similar pattern to the standard AR verbs for the present tense, the simplest tense, but it's a little bit different. So as, a, hemos, habéis, an. So these are the endings, or I guess the conjugations you have to learn, and then you've got your past participle. So after this plus sign, I'm going to write past participle, and that's how we form it. So to give you an example, so I have eaten, comido. Got for I have, comido, eaten. The second word never changes. They have eaten and comido. Yeah? We have lived, hemos vivido. That second word there never changes depending on the first. Just in this tense, we're going to have this ido, ado, etc. So that's the present perfect tense. We've got irregulars as well. So, and the irregulars are with the participles. So, for example, ver to see, visto is seen. So I could say he visto, I have seen. Dicho from decir is dicho, I have said. So decir is to say or to tell. So he dicho, I have said. So we do have some irregulars with these as well. Then moving on to the past perfect tense. The past perfect works really, really similarly. However, so the other one was I have, this is had. So for example, I had eaten. Yeah? The only difference is this tense is about the had. So actions that have been done maybe slightly further away. So you've got your have and had. The difference is there, had is usually something that's done a bit further away in the past. So it's still made up of haber plus your past participle. That bit doesn't change. But in this case, the conjugations of haber are going to change because we're using haber in the imperfect tense. So before we had it in the present tense. So this is haber in the present tense. Now we're going to use haber in the imperfect tense. So había is I had, etc. So habías, había. These are just the regular conjugations of the imperfect tense for er verbs, ia, ias, ia, etc. So this is a regular sort of set of endings here. Habíamos, habíais, and habían. Oops. Plus your past participle as before. So the same comido and hablado, etc. Those words stay the same. So let's try and say we had seen. I'm going to give you a second to work this one out. If I move up here, maybe you can look. We've talked about the one for seen, which is here. So we had seen is habíamos. visto. Because it's irregular, this visto is not vido. It's not vido, it's visto because it's just irregular. Okay? One more practice. Let's do they had lived. It's going to be habían vivido. And that's it. That is the past perfect tense. But this is also called the pluperfect as well. If you want to look it up somewhere else, it can be referred to as the pluperfect as well. So these are the two perfect tenses that you will see at GCSE and A-Level. And that is going to be all the sort of tenses we're going to cover in this video. The only other thing we have left is a subjunctive, which isn't really a tense, it's more of a mood. And I'm going to do that in just a second. If you have any questions so far, leave a comment below. Now on to the subjunctive. This is not technically a tense, it's what we call a mood. It's used in specific situations in Spanish, and it doesn't exist in English at all. For GCSE and A-Level students, the only two types of subjunctive you have to concern yourself about is the present subjunctive and the imperfect subjunctive. And we're going to touch on both of these in this video, but I'm going to mainly focus on the present subjunctive. So, I said that the subjunctive is used in specific situations. We've got acronyms to help us learn these situations. The one I'm going to talk about is WHOOP, but there is another one called weirdo. I'm going to use WHOOP just because it's shorter, but weirdo stands for wishes, emotions, impersonal expressions, recommendations, doubt, and ojalá. All of that is mostly covered in the shorter acronym WHOOP. So the W here is for wishes. So in English to say, I hope to be a footballer, that would be espero ser futbolista. I hope to be a footballer, I hope to become a footballer, supposedly in the future. This sentence does not have the subjunctive because we're talking about ourselves. The only subject in this whole sentence is us, is I. So I hope to be a footballer. However, once we use the same sentence for someone else, we have to use the subjunctive. So, espero que seas futbolista. I hope that you be or you will become or you are a footballer. We have to say espero que. Because it's not for ourselves anymore, we've got a different subject. We're saying I hope that you be a footballer. And in Spanish for jobs, we don't you say a, so there's no un or una here. It's just ser futbolista, seas futbolista. So that's the example here of the subjunctive. This seas means the same thing as eres. You are from that verb ser in the present tense, but we have to use this present subjunctive, which is almost an alternative version of the present tense. It's got different endings, but it can be translated as the same way as you are, or you may see it as you will be or you will become, etc. Okay, another example of a wish can be with the verb quiero, I want. So if I say quiero que, I want that, you understand. Entender is to understand. I'll talk about the conjugations once I go through this acronym WHOOP, but entiendas, I want you to understand, or I want that you understand. Entiendas el subjuntivo. So this means that I want you to understand the subjunctive. So that's wishes. We can have espero, quiero, deseo as the other verb, as another verb of saying sort of I wish or I desire. Once we've got deseo que, espero que, and we talk about someone else doing something, or you want someone else to do something, whatever verb that is, we're going to use the subjunctive like this. Okay, the next in our acronym is this letter O, which is for opinions. So, some examples. If I say es bueno, it is good that, es bueno que, I could say a noun here, so el tren sea rápido. So this means it is good that the train is quick. Sea, again, it translates as it is. So you may be thinking, why don't we just use es? But in this specific expression, because we've got es bueno que, we just have to use a subjunctive. It's one of those weird rules in Spanish, and the subjunctive doesn't make sense to us, English speakers, because it doesn't exist in English, but it's just how it works. You just have to learn that for your exams when you learn the language. Okay, another example. If I say, this more relates to GCSE sort of students. If I say me gusta, which is a really common expression, I like, I can have an infinitive, so me gusta ser, or me gusta jugar, etc. Or noun, so me gusta el fútbol. But I can also have me gusta que. It's just after me gusta que I have to use the subjunctive. So me gusta que haya una piscina en mi escuela, whatever. I like that there is. This haya, sorry, is the same as there is or there are in the indicative tense. So the present indicative is the normal present tense, and the subjunctive is this alternative, the subjunctive that we're talking about right now. So haya is in the subjunctive. So me gusta que haya, after this que, it's an opinion sort of structure. I like that. We just have to have the subjunctive, which is one of those rules that we have to follow. So those are two examples in terms of opinions. Obviously, you can swap out me gusta for me encanta or anything else, and then es bueno. Bueno can be any other adjective, interesante, etc. Any adjective there. Okay, so let's keep moving through this. The next O is for obligations. Just like we had es bueno que, I can say, let me do this in pink. Es importante que. It is important that, I could say hagas, that you do, or es necesario, it is necessary that you do, hagas. The indicative version is haces, it's irregular, which is why there's a G in there, but yeah, hagas is you do, so it is important or necessary that you do. This sort of format where we've got an adjective here showing the obligation, something must be done, it's important that something is done. With this word que, we're going to have the subjunctive. Okay, another example. If I say my mother demands that I clean my bedroom, that would be mi madre. Manda que has that meaning of demands. Manda que limpie mi dormitorio. So just like above, we've got this word que, which quite often triggers the subjunctive in these sorts of triggers. Que. Limpie is limpio, but in the subjunctive mood. Okay. And the last letter in this acronym is P, which is for possibility. This may be the sort of one you're most familiar with. So things that are uncertain or unlikely, that we are unsure about, any sort of doubt as well, is this sort of P possibility category. So to give you some examples, if I say no creo que, we need to have the present subjunctive after this. Yeah? If I say creo que, that's perfectly fine because that's saying you believe something, but no creo que, I don't believe that haya una piscina. I don't think that, I don't believe that there is a swimming pool, ... in whatever you want to say. So no creo que, no pienso que, plus the present subjunctive. I could say es improbable que, just like we saw in the earlier examples, with es bueno que and es importante que, a similar structure, but this time for uncertainty. Es improbable, it is unlikely, which is what that means. It is unlikely that. Es improbable que llueva mañana. So it is unlikely that it rains tomorrow, from llover, to rain. So that's the acronym WHOOP. It's shorter than WEIRDO, which is what other teachers use. Let's now talk about the conjugations and how to actually conjugate verbs in this subjunctive mood. So the steps are as follows. The first step is we take the present tense yo form of any given verb. So I'm going to write the example tengo in blue here. So tengo. Then the second step is we remove the O, the final letter O there, and this will become our stem. Tengo now is just teng, and the final or third step is we add the appropriate ending. So for AR verbs, we're going to have hemos, ace, n. And then for ER or IR verbs, we're going to have a, as, amos, ais, an. So because tener is an ER verb, the ending we're going to use to say, for example, I have is a. So tenga is I have in the subjunctive. Okay, and that's how we conjugate the present subjunctive. Frankly, you don't need to really know this for GCSE. For A-level you do, but not really for GCSE. You just need to know how to use it in the writing exam, which is what we're going to talk about now. But before we do that, there is also an imperfect subjunctive that I mentioned earlier. I'm not going to go through the endings right now because you don't really need to know it for GCSE at all. But I'll put the endings on screen. There's not enough space on this page for me to do that. I may end up making a separate video that goes into the subjunctive in more detail. But the main thing I want to get onto for this video is the GCSE expressions. So how to use the subjunctive at GCSE in the writing and speaking exams. So one way is cuando sea mayor. So this is when I'm older. So an example sentence. So cuando sea mayor, I could say me gustaría. So you can follow it with that conditional tense, which is the easiest thing to do. Me gustaría, or the direct conditional tense. So for example, cambiaría or ayudaría. So using the conditional tense with the infinitive plus the ending. This is one way of, and probably the easiest way for you guys to continue the sentence cuando sea mayor. And here you're using the subjunctive with the word sea, which is the same as soy. But again, we have to use the subjunctive in this type of sentence. Another example, let's do cuando tenga. So on a similar vein, talking about age and when you're older in the future. So cuando tenga, I could say 30 años. Oops. Cuando tenga 30 años, when I have or when I am 30 years old. In Spanish, we use tener for age, so we're saying I am, but we're also saying I have. And you can continue this with the conditional tense as well. Apart from the conditional tense, you can say voy a, so the near future, you can say quiero. There are a lot of different ways you can continue the sentence. Either one of those does the trick. Another example of the subjunctive, this time the imperfect subjunctive. So if I say si tuviera, I could say la opción if I had the option, or si tuviera más dinero o más tiempo, or I could also say si tuviera la oportunidad. A lot of different sort of nouns you can put in this case. Oportunidad, and then you can say I would. So compraría, for example, compraría una casa, or any sort of conditional expression here as well. More examples. So number 4 here. Let's do si fuera. So if I was or if I were, si fuera el director, like the head teacher, si fuera un profesor, any sort of job in this case. Continued by I would, so again that conditional tense. Me gustaría, ayudaría, any sort of verb plus the ending for the conditional, etc. Quiero, whatever, future tense, conditional tense, even the near future. So really good sentence starters. The more of these you use, the better marks you'll get for the writing and speaking. Don't overdo it, but try and include one subjunctive sentence, whether that's the present subjunctive or the imperfect subjunctive, in each of your writing questions. Okay, I'm going to squeeze in 2 more examples just to give you as many different options that you have. So let's do ojalá. So we saw this when I mentioned the acronym weirdo. The letter O at the end stands for ojalá. Ojalá is like I wish. It's one of those expressions that just means I wish. Like I wish something, like God willing, something would happen. So ojalá pudiera plus infinitive. So ojalá pudiera ir a los Estados Unidos. I wish I could go to the United States, los Estados Unidos, for example. Yeah, and you can have porque sería, because it would be ... Okay, and the final example that I'm going to squeeze in is going to be, let's do quisiera. So this means I would like. And we can have quisiera plus infinitive. Just like me gustaría, it has that same meaning, but this iera ending is the imperfect subjunctive. So for example, quisiera ir, quisiera viajar, plus your infinitive there. Okay, I've literally run out of space now, but those are 6 expressions there that you should try and use that all have the subjunctive. Okay, that is now the end of this video. I'm going to make the sheet look all nice for you and put it on my website, astarspanish.com/grammar, for you guys to download. If you watched till the end, let me know by telling me what your favorite tense is in the comments. Good luck with your language learning journey, and adios!